Hi, I'm Rebecca Balcarcel. Let's take a look at A Rose for Emily, the short story by William Faulkner. He starts out like this. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, the women mostly out of curiosity, to see the inside of her house, which no one, save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in at least 10 years. We can see already that Faulkner likes long sentences, and I suggest reading this story out loud to get the gist of it. It's a little easier than trying to read it silently. Alright, so we've met Miss Grierson, and we know that she died. The whole story now is going to go back and talk about events in her life, and we won't come back to her death until the very end of the story, when there's a surprise and a twist. Almost like a mild horror story, or as English teachers like to call it, a gothic story. So we meet Miss Emily, she's died, and we see that the town reacts to her death with some awe. They're amazed, oh, we get to go see what the house looks like, we haven't been in there for so long. And they have a sense of respect too, because this is one of the old women of the town who used to be from a well-to-do family, one of the founding families probably of this town in the Deep South called Jefferson. Now Faulkner divides the story into 5 sections. In section 1, we find out, yes, Miss Emily has died, and we learn more about the town's relationship to her. And in fact, the narrator just says we all the time. We saw Miss Emily do this, we heard that this happened, and the town tells the story of what they saw. We never get to see Miss Emily talking to herself. We're not inside of her head, we're not inside of her heart. We don't know what she's thinking. We're just observing from the outside, the same way that the town did. Now, also in section 1, we have this line. Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. So she's a duty, she's an old woman you have to make allowances for, but she's also a care, which means that she is a bit of a burden, and we'll see why. Further on in that section, they say that they sent her notice that her taxes were due. Now she sends them a note, and the narrator describes it as archaic. The note is on this old kind of paper, and it's written in a flowing calligraphy in faded ink. So it's an old style of handwriting, and she tells them, well, I don't go out anymore, so I'm not going to be able to come to the town meeting and explain to you why I'm not paying my taxes. They then have to call a special meeting. And it says they called the Board of Aldermen together. This is like a city council. So they called the town leaders together to figure out what to do. How do we make this lady pay her taxes? But the old folks realize you can't make her do anything. I mean, are you going to arrest this old woman, this legend of the town? And is that what you really want to do? So they try to send a group over to see her. And here's what happens. They rose when she entered. So these are men, so they stand up when a lady enters the room. They rose when she entered, a small fat woman in black. And she is described in grotesque terms, looking bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue. She looks like a body that has drowned. It's pretty gross. And that stagnant feeling fits with her life, which has been lived all in this one house. Now, they go. She listens to them. It says she did not ask them to sit. So that means that she did not invite them to make themselves comfortable. You know, she did not offer them a drink. She just stiffly listens to their argument. But apparently the spokesman comes to a stumbling halt. So he just kind of runs out of words because she's not responding. Then she said, I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city's records and satisfy yourselves. And they try to explain to her that they already did this, that she really does owe the taxes, but she refuses to believe it. And this is the first example where we have Miss Emily living in her own version of reality. In her reality, the Colonel Sartoris made a deal with her father about the taxes, and it's a done deal. And these young whippersnappers, what do they know about it? But she's not giving them a cent. Now we have section 2. So she vanquished them, horse and foot. That means that she won that argument, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before, about the smell. The smell? Faulkner's always doing this, little surprises. Okay, she vanquished the fathers 30 years before. That means now we're going to go even further back in time, and the leaders at that time had an issue with her too. And the issue was the smell. Faulkner explains, after her father's death, she went out very little. After her sweetheart went away, people hardly saw her at all. And later we'll learn more about the sweetheart. But then they were not surprised, it says, when the smell developed. So people complained to the town leaders, to the judge, in particular, Judge Stevens, who was 80 years old, but he refused to confront a woman. He says, you can't just tell a lady to her face that she smells bad. So she is again winning the argument. They're just afraid to confront her. So they take care of the smell themselves by sprinkling lime around the house in the dead of night like burglars. And they see her silhouette in the window, kind of like a scary movie. Okay, one more thing in section 2. The narrator mentions her aunt. It says, that was when people had begun to feel really sorry for her, right around the time of the smell. People in our town, remembering how old Lady Wyatt, her great-aunt, had gone completely crazy at last, believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high for what they really were. So we learn that she had an aunt who was mentally unstable, and this is a little hint that maybe it runs in the family. If this is a hereditary mental illness, then maybe Miss Emily is susceptible as well. Further in that paragraph, it goes on, none of the young men were quite good enough for Miss Emily and such. And in fact, we see that her father drove away would-be boyfriends with a whip. So he was so protective of his daughter that no one ever got near her. And really her father cut off any hope of her having a future with a husband. Her father is too controlling, perhaps, to let her go. And maybe Emily herself is pretty controlling, because look how she treated people about the taxes, and the smell also. People are a bit afraid of her. Okay. The next thing that happens in the section 2 is that we find out that when her father died, Miss Emily refused to believe it. So again, she's staying in her own reality, her own version of things. Faulkner says, the day after his death, all the ladies prepared to call at the house. Call means visit, and offer condolence and aid, as is our custom. So, just like now, people bring food and try to support the grieving survivor of a death. Miss Emily met them at the door dressed as usual, with no trace of grief on her face. She told them that her father was not dead. She did that for 3 days. So it took her a while to accept the fact that he had actually died, and it made sense too, because this is a man who had ruled her life and prevented her from starting any other kind of life. In fact, it says that the town was sorry for her. We did not say she was crazy then about not letting the father be dead. We believed that she had to do that. We remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and we knew that with nothing left, meaning no money and no life, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. So she would cling to the father, the very person who had taken away her chance at a better life. She couldn't let him go because that's the only life she had. So we have another hint that she's not necessarily mentally stable. She has the aunt, and now we see her not facing reality about her father's death. All right, section 3. The important thing that happens in section 3 is that we meet a sweetheart that she actually has, Homer Barron, a Yankee. Now, the fact that he's a Yankee makes him kind of a symbol in this story of Northerners who came to the South after the Civil War to exploit the situation, to profit from the South's reduced circumstances. So in that sense, Miss Emily is like the Old South, being in relationship with this Yankee who we don't quite trust. He comes along, and he's part of a group of men who are putting in new sidewalks in the town. So the town is moving forward into these modern things like sidewalks, and Homer Barron is in charge of that. So he comes, and he starts to take an interest in Miss Emily. At first, we were glad that Miss Emily would have an interest. So at first the town thinks, oh good, she's finally going to have a man in her life. She's going to have a boyfriend or a hope for a marriage even, and her father won't be able to drive this person away. And of course, for a woman like Miss Emily, there's no way for her to get a job or get an education. She grew up in a generation where women were not allowed to do those kinds of things. So when this man comes along, this could save her life, could turn it around. But later we see that she's out in carriages with him so much that people start whispering and thinking, uh-oh, what is going on? Maybe they have actually, spent time alone together. That would be very improper. And in fact, the town is so concerned that they call her kinfolk, her relatives, who live far away in Alabama, I believe. So they thought that Miss Emily might have even, I think, slept with this man. At least Faulkner refers to her with the word fallen, as if she's a fallen woman, as if she has committed some drastic sin. So that's why they bring in the cousins. Maybe the cousins will bring her in line, make her behave, make her get married. We don't know exactly what happened, but the next thing the town hears, Miss Emily is at the drugstore and says, I want some poison, she said to the druggist. She was over 30 then, still a slight woman, though thinner than usual, with cold, haughty black eyes, etc. And we have a long sentence, of course. So she's still haughty, she's still snobby, a little bit above everyone, but now she's buying poison. Now, why is that? So the druggist is wondering too, well, Miss Emily, you need it for rats, or what do you want? Eventually she says, I want arsenic, and this is scary because the druggist, by law, has to know what she's going to use it for, and she refuses to answer him. So again, she thinks she's above the law, or that rules don't apply to her because of her status, perhaps. She does not need to be questioned. She will not let anyone question her actions, her motives. She just stares at him until he relents, sells it to her, and he just writes on the box, for rats, so that she knows this is supposed to be used for rats. All right, now why are we talking about the poison? Because the next thing that happens is the town thinks she will kill herself. And this is at the beginning of section 4. So the next day we all said she will kill herself. News travels fast, they found out she bought arsenic, and they think, well, she'll kill herself. Now, why would she kill herself now when she has this sweetheart? It seems that they've been hearing things about this sweetheart. Homer Barron, it turns out, they had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club, that he was not a marrying man. Now, does it mean that he's homosexual, that he's gay? I don't know. It could. On the other hand, it could just mean that he wants to be a bachelor. He likes the company of men because he just enjoys being around guys and throwing back a beer or two. He's having fun. He never intended to marry her. And if that's true, then he's a bit of a scoundrel because obviously Miss Emily thought, that this romance was going somewhere. And if it's not going anywhere, then she might be angry about it. On the town's side, though, they think, well, if he's not the marrying kind, then it's probably good if she kills herself. That must be why she bought the poison, because he's throwing her over, he's breaking up with her, and she'll kill herself. But that is not what happened. And then they see that Miss Emily is buying something special in town. It says, then we were sure that they were to be married. Okay, we learned that Miss Emily had been to the jeweler's and ordered a man's toilet set in silver with the letters HB on each piece. Now, a toilet set might be a little brush, a comb, something for his beard, or tweezers, that kind of thing. Maybe a little shaving kit type of thing. So she bought this in silver. That's a pretty big investment. It's the kind of thing that one would buy for a wedding present. 2 days later, we learned that she had bought a complete outfit of men's clothing, including a nightshirt. Ooh, that implies sleeping together. So, ooh, they are married, the town assumes. We said, they're married. We were really glad. She would never buy a nightshirt if they weren't married, right? So, the next thing that happens is Homer Barron was back in town. A neighbor saw the Negro man admit him at the kitchen door at dusk one evening, and that was the last we saw of Homer Barron. The next thing we hear is that for almost 6 months, Miss Emily did not appear on the streets. And they assume that Homer Barron has left her, disappeared, and that she's alone. So this is why she kept indoors for 6 months. Kind of like when her father died, she just removed herself for a while. Then the door of her house remained closed, except for a little while when she was teaching China painting lessons. Okay, so that emphasizes how she's from a time period when women would do such a thing. Meanwhile, the town is moving forward. Not only do they have the sidewalks, but they're getting a post office or postal service. But Miss Emily refuses to let them put the numbers on her door and attach a mailbox to the house. Again, she's insisting on her own way. She does not want to be dragged into the future. She doesn't even let people repair the house. Everything is going to stay like it was, in a static, preserved mode. And finally, at the end of section 4, she dies. And it says, and so she died. One of the few short sentences in the whole story. And so she died. So this is when our flashback ends. We opened the story with her death, and now here we are again. She's died. And we've learned a little bit about her, her controlling father, the failed romance with Homer Barron, and the fact that only a servant is in her life as far as another living soul. We know about her arguments with the town council, how she refuses to get a mailbox, refuses to pay taxes, holds herself above everything, and also lives in her own reality, which may be kind of a mental illness. And now we get the horrific conclusion. The manservant meets them at the door when people of the town come to see the dead body. And remember, partly they're just curious, and partly they're paying their respects. Now the servant walks right through the house and out the back and was not seen again. So he's finally free. It's almost like he was a slave, if not in name, then effectively he was. And now he's free. The two female cousins came at once, so the relatives come to get the funeral arranged. Miss Emily was beneath a mass of bought flowers, with the crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, and the ladies sibilant and macabre. So there's a portrait of her father that's over her. Even in death, the father is present for her. When they say that the ladies have a sibilant exchange, it just means that they're whispering with a lot of S's, like that. So everybody's kind of curious, looking at the dead body. Some of the men come in their brushed Confederate uniforms. That reminds us how old she was. The fact that there are still Confederate soldiers around. And, this reminds us that she's part of the Old South that's dying away. Near the end, the narrator says, already we knew that there was one room in that region above the stairs which no one had seen in 40 years, and which would have to be forced. Apparently, they somehow know that the upstairs of the home has not been used. It was closed up and closed off, and maybe one room in particular was closed and would have to be forced. It just means that they'll have to pry open that door. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill this room with pervading dust. A thin, acrid pall, as of the tomb, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal. Bridal as in a bride who has been married. And Faulkner goes on to describe this room that looks like it's for a wedding, like one's first night as a married couple, that you would go to a bed that was specially decorated and so on. And there they see the silver shaving kit thing that was bought, as well as that suit of clothing that was bought by Emily for Homer Barron. It's as if the room is preserving the time when she was courted by him and dated him and knew him. And then comes the surprise. Upon a chair hung the suit carefully folded, beneath it the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in the bed. Another short sentence and another surprising sentence. The body of Homer Barron is there in the bed. For a long while we just stood there, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, like as if it's hugging or something, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. Cuckolded him means that it kind of was unfaithful to him. Sleep has won, death has won over his love and his life. What was left of him rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt. Oh yeah, the nightshirt. Remember that she bought a nightshirt? Had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biding dust. Faulkner mentions dust a lot. In almost every scene of the house, he refers to the dust. So, why is this dead body in her bed? Well, that arsenic she bought obviously poisoned this man. Homer Barron was poisoned by either her or could be the servant. We don't know, but here he is dead in the bed. And we know now the explanation of the smell. Obviously the body was rotting and it smelled. So this answers a lot of questions. The very last paragraph, then we notice that in the second pillow, all right, so this is a bed with the body on one side, the dead body, but now we have on the other side, half of the bed is another pillow with an indentation of a head. So we know that someone's been lying on that pillow. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dry dust and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair. That is Miss Emily's hair, which has been described as iron gray previously in the story. So she's been sleeping on the bed with a corpse. It's rather shocking, and like I said, gothic. This story includes these grotesque elements. Now, was she actually in some kind of intimate relationship with this corpse? Is she a necrophiliac who has attraction to corpses or has sex with corpses? That is something that people say, and it may be true. This hair and the indentation on the pillow means that she certainly slept there. If the corpse was at one time in the attitude of embrace, she may have, positioned the body so that he's hugging her. Ooh, that is disgusting. So in that definition of necrophilia, yes, she sought comfort from a dead man, and she controlled his life in the way that she controlled so many things, by killing him and not allowing him to leave her. If he did leave her, she would be humiliated, for one thing, and she would lose control of him. So she has kept him here by killing him. We don't know, though, that she actually had sex with the corpse. I mean, maybe she just laid down next to it and, wanted it hugging her, and, I mean, that's gross enough, right? And we don't know what the servant thought about this. The African-American near slave probably knew about it, but what could he do? But he served her in the traditional role quite loyally and finally got free by her death. Now, there's a lot of stuff to say about the story. Faulkner's style with his flashbacks, his use of we as if the town is speaking the story, the way that we observe Miss Emily and we never enter into her own mind or her own feelings. But probably the most common thing that college professors point out about this story is that Miss Emily is a symbol of the Old South that cannot change and move forward with the new ideas. She just has to die in order for the town to move forward. So there is a rose for Emily. Oh, and one note about the title. William Faulkner described the whole story as a kind of gift to this sort of woman, and he probably knew women kind of like this. So this is a tribute to them, even though it's also kind of a gross story and a macabre story, not only because of the dead body and her sleeping with the dead body, but because the town, or we, and by implication even the reader, have been voyeuristic about watching her and checking up on her and being suspicious of her, being afraid of her. We have been in this relationship with her, and in a way she deserves this tribute as a symbol of the Old South, as a symbol of the old dignity and the old money that used to run things. But at the same time, it's not endorsing that way of life, because obviously she had serious problems, and mental problems especially, and the Old South, perhaps, if she's the symbol for it, is hopelessly flawed, fatally flawed. And that way of life could not go on. All right, I hope you understand the story a little better and that you'll read the whole thing carefully, and like I said, try reading it out loud. All right, join me for another video sometime.